And what we're doing here as storytellers is we're remembering that the West is good and that this was a great hero of the West, which explains why the West is good. But we're doing it in a storytelling way. That's how we communicate these abstract ideas as artists in a way that's not propaganda. Is we're saying this amazing story about this amazing person that lived, centuries ago and has fundamentally changed how we exist now. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Pinedo Brothers Podcast. I'm JP and I got my brother here.
Peter, right here.
Before we introduce the guests, if you're just joining us here on the Pinedo Brothers Podcast, Peter and I are filmmakers, Catholic filmmakers, working to revitalize the world of Catholic art through film. If you like our mission, maybe follow us, leave a comment, tell us how we can improve, because we would love that type of feedback. This is what this YouTube channel is for. Now on to our great guest, Dr. Caleb Gonzalez. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much. My pleasure. Yeah.
I met Caleb, I think it was through a book club that we were both a part of. When I think we called ourselves the Texas Inklings. Is that right?
Yeah, that's totally right. And I would make this joke with all my friends that I call it, it's not a book club.
That's, yeah.
Because I never imagined myself being in a book club. So I always say, I'm not in a book club. We happen to read books and we happen to discuss it, but for crying out loud, it's not a book club. We also do other stuff.
That's very true. It was not your average book club.
Yeah.
But we also discovered we had a lot of other interests in common besides reading great books. Caleb is a filmmaker. He's crazy enough to want to be a filmmaker himself, despite the fact that he's a research scientist working to find a cure for cancer here in the Houston Medical Center. So that's a story in and of itself.
So,
Caleb, I don't know why you want to join this crazy world of storytelling.
Oh, goodness. I think, so we're all searchers of truth, right? And that's part of what I do as a scientist, right? But the three great pillars, the good, the truth, and the beautiful. I think the most powerful one is beauty, right? And that's one of the things that, brings me so close, attracts me so much to filmmaker, because it's practically a perfect art. The sense that you can tell stories and you can tell them beautiful and speak right to the heart. And that really, I am always been fascinated by it since I was a kid. So yeah, I think that's my rationale for being crazy.
That's a beautiful rationale. I think it's something that Peter and I both connect with, right, Pete?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to bring Caleb on to speak about a very important topic. And it's one that not many people here in the States know much about. King Alfred the great king of around 9th century Britain. Of course, it wasn't Britain at that time. It was England. England hadn't really even been formed as a nation. And that's what makes this man so great, because he made England a thing. It wasn't really something that existed prior to them. But I wanted to ask a little bit about why, because Caleb, you and I have talked about Alfred. You've recommended me books about Alfred. What is it about Alfred that has made you so interested in this great king?
Oh, wonderful. So thinking about Alfred, one of the things that came up to mind is the great line by Saint Irenaeus. He says, that great quote from him says, the glory of God is man fully alive. And I love that. And I love that saying. And whenever I think of that, I think of someone who really embodies that, and that is Alfred the Great. It's a life of virtue that shows what men can be when they live a life of virtue, when they live a life close to God. And Alfred embodies all those things. So I think when in our current society where there's so much skepticism about truth, about good, and about beauty, it's always great to reflect back on the past and look at those examples of leadership, of people who care deeply about their faith and put into action those beliefs into palpable actions that had an enormous consequence on world history. So I can make a very strong argument, like you were saying in the introduction, rightly so, that there's no England without Alfred, right? So that's how consequential this great man was.
Absolutely.
And for the Americans, we should also make a note that that without England, there's no the United States. So this is not just a British kind of concern. Like he has consequences of his actions and his virtue extend far beyond his own time, far beyond his own borders to us in the United States today as well.
Yes, and hopefully we'll get into some of those details. He's getting a little bit ahead of myself, but for a great example of what Peter just mentioned is common law. He laid out the reformation of the legal system of his kingdom of Wessex was the foundation for the law theory that engendered common law in England, right? And now that's the same legal system that we have today. So it is just, if you really look really hard, it is incredible. It's absolutely incredible.
It is. And I want to get to that a little bit later, but still talking about why we should care so much. Like, obviously, common law is a great reason why we should care about it so much. But I was listening to a podcast by Jordan Peterson today. Which he titled, I guess maybe it wasn't a podcast, it was a 30-minute long rant that I love when he puts those out on YouTube. He titled it "The Conservative Manifesto," and I knew what he was doing like within the first 2 minutes when he said "conservative manifesto" and he was describing it, because he's spoken about this idea in the past, how us as conservatives, we need to tell a story that is appealing to others. That it's very easy to have that communist manifesto, or going back to another kind of rebeller, the 33 bulls that Luther nailed to the Antwerp Cathedral. It's very easy to get on board with as a usurper, and jump on that bandwagon. But a conservative is something in the opposite. It's like no. What do we want? Substantive change over time. That is like not a very appealing rally cry. And so what
Hegelian worldview. Yeah.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, no, go ahead. I was saying the Hegelian worldview,
there we go. You have to unpack that worldview a little bit more for us. But what Peterson is doing right now is he's telling a story in a way that the conservative story in a way that other people can say, oh, that I like that. I want to be a part of that team. And what we're doing here as storytellers is we're remembering two things. One, that the West is good, and that this was a great hero of the West, which explains why the West is good. But we're doing it in a storytelling way. That's how we communicate these abstract ideas as artists in a way that's not propaganda. As we're saying this amazing story about this amazing person that lived, centuries ago, and has fundamentally changed how we exist now and how we think now, how we imagine now. Our very imagination has been changed because of things like common law. And so when we're telling Alfred's story, and that's something that we should probably clarify, because people are probably wondering, especially us Americans, okay, is that King Arthur? Is that King Alfred? What, who are we talking about? We're not talking about King Arthur here. We're talking about King Alfred the Great, which Arthur predated Alfred by about 400 years. So what we're doing is we're remembering this great story. And we're also telling, okay, this is a really fun thing that will end up. How would we tell this great story on film as our medium? What would we do? Because these are the kind of stories that Peter and I think you as well, Caleb, are inspired to tell. So let's start a little bit at the beginning.
Yes.
So we've said a little bit about it right now, but why? What can you give me a little bit of its history of? What's the genesis of Alfred, and where does he come from?
So I think we should, when any good story about Alfred, we should go a little bit back in time before his time. and think about what was happening in the Isles of the British in Britain back in before before Alfred was in time. So I think a very good point to start is to tell our audience what was happening, a little bit of history of Britain. So the Romans, going back to Roman times, right? The Romans started to conquest the British Isles, right? They refer to what today is Scotland as Caledonia, and what today is Ireland as Ibernia, and Britannia, what today we consider to be Britain. So they conquest it and they established, and this is very important because as the Romans came in, they brought in the Roman civilization, all the structures of communication between different towns, which were very much still in use by the time of King Alfred, right? A lot of the towns were founded by the Romans that were vibrant towns by the time that Alfred was king, right? Including London, Canterbury, and some of the other towns that were established by the Romans. But then that incursion of Roman Empire in Britain lasted for about 400 years, right? Until the Visigoths invaded Rome, and the Roman legions were called back behind. So literally all these Roman legions who were defending the British Isles from attacks from the Picts, what today is Scotland, they never were able really to successfully conquer those people. They literally left the island, and the Romans who decided to stay behind, they did stay behind. But an important point is at this time, Rome was evangelized. The Britons were Catholics. There was an evangelization movement in England at this time. So when the Romans leave England, there's a vacuum, right? And all of a sudden you have this mass migration from Germanic tribes, the Angles and the Saxons and the Jews. They start migrating towards the British Isle. And it wasn't necessary. Historians argue about this. It was like an invasion that happened overnight. But a lot of historians now propose that it was a process that lasted for basically 200 years of constant immigration. First they came in knocking at the doors, and they were hired by the leadership of Roman towns to be as mercenaries and protect them from attacks from pirates and whatnot. But all of a sudden they start farming and staying. So the Angles and the Saxons and the Jews start colonizing England. And these were, mind you, these were pagans, right? And the local population of Britons who were left behind were Christian. And there's a fascinating story by the ecclesiastical history of Betis. If that's one thing, I'm going to butcher a bunch of names, so please bear with me and be open to correct me. That he says that the Roman citizens were not, or the Roman clergy in Britain, were not too enthused to evangelize the Angles and the Saxons and the pagans who were invading and taking their lands, to say, well, in a way, in a very facetious way, you may take the land, but, you're not going to go to heaven because you're pagans, right? And it wasn't until around the 7th century, late 7th century, that Pope Gregory the Great found some Saxons in Rome, in the slave market in Rome, and he wondered who are these people. And the story goes that he found them very different. They were blonde hair, blue eyes, and they told him, these are Saxon, and he was explained that these are pagans. And he says, he decided then to send a mission to evangelize the Saxon. And there he sent what today we know as Augustine of Canterbury, St. Augustine of Canterbury, to evangelize. He's for the first real evangelization effort that happened in England, in Anglo-Saxon England at that time. And then thereafter, within 30 years, the famous monastery of Lindisfarne was founded by Aidan, son Aidan, which is, and it's a name that sort of Celtic name, I think, that means bringer of fire. But he brought the fire of the light of God to the British Isle, and then thereafter this pagan people start converting to Catholicism and they become Christians, and there was this period, sort of a golden age, where there was peace, there was prosperity, and Alfred was very conscientious about that time period in history where the Angles were firing all cylinders with God. Okay, so I'm sorry if I'm going. I just want to lay out the foundation so our audience knows. And by the time Alfred was born, there were basically 7 kingdoms, Anglo-Saxon kingdoms in England. Northumbria, East Anglia, Sussex, Essex, Wessex, Mercia, Kent. I think those are the 7. I might be missing one. But by the time he was about 100 years before he was born, the Vikings show up to England and start raiding. And Vikings are basically, most of them were from Denmark, and they were basically farmers who, in the off time, they went out on missions to plunder, rape, and carnage, right, across continental Europe and in England. And there's this famous sacking of the monastery at Lindisfarne, which basically was what kickstarted all this raiding. So the Vikings were very smart in selecting their targets. They never wanted to have an open warfare with a powerful enemy. They just picked their targets, towns that were undefended. And guess what? This great island, so Lindisfarne is a monastery, I should have said, that it's an island. When there is high tide, when there's low tide, it's connected, there's a land bridge to the island. But it was the center of religiosity and culture of England at that time. Many saints came out of that monastery. And a lot of learning came out of that monastery. It was the sort of high culture happened, high worship happened in there. And then all of a sudden, this Vikings raiders came in and completely desecrated the monastery. And this is about 100 years before Alfred was born. By the time he was born, there was this Viking incursion into Anglo-Saxon England were very, very, very common. Now, a little bit about Alfred, and I'll try to be more succinct now that we have the sort of the foundation of what was happening in Anglo-Saxon set. Alfred was the son of King Ethelwulf. I love Anglo-Saxons' name. They are really awesome.
That's an important key too. That all of these names. Peter and I love Tolkien,
yes.
or Tolkien, yes. As people would say.
Yeah.
He took these Anglo-Saxon names, and if you were to read the genealogies that he had in the Silmarillion, they read like he took the same prefixes and there's the same suffixes. He was inspired by this time, this 8th century time, with all these 8th century kings and 9th century kings, and that becomes the genealogy for his mythology.
Oh, definitely. The Anglo-Saxon world is the world of Middle Earth. Actually. Quite interesting. The Anglo-Saxon call the realm, the world that they live in, as Middle Earth. Between the heavens and Earth is Middle Earth. This is actually an Anglo-Saxon name in which refers the world. So yeah, I think the Tolkien world is an Anglo-Saxon world. I think. You look at the Rohirrans and the Mid Hall, the Great Hall of the Kings. That's total Anglo-Saxon. The system of villages called Shire. That's a complete invention by the Anglo-Saxons. Completely translated in Tolkien. And I love Tolkien. So what is really interesting, one of the things I do love about Alfred is that when he was growing up, a young lad, growing up in the royal court, he was the 5th son of his father, right? The eldest son, Ethelwald, was about 20 years his senior. So this is a kid who had 5, have brothers that were way ahead in line for the throne. There was very low expectation of him ever ascending to the throne of England. So and moreover, since he was like, the youngest, when you have a big family, you have the younger child, he's the one that is baby. There's a wonderful, let me see if I can find it here. There's a wonderful story. So Asser is King Alfred's biography. He was a Welsh monk, and he wrote that Alfred was greatly loved, more than all his brothers, by his father and mother, indeed by everyone. He says that with a universal profound love, he was always brought up in the royal court and nowhere else. So it seems to be unusual at that time that Alfred was at all times with his father, the king, and his mother, in all endeavors of the royal court, which it served as a great educational foundation for him to learn by example of his father to be virtuous men. And that indeed he was. So two more things I want to say about his childhood, and was that he was 5 years old. He was sent by his father to Rome, and he was confirmed by Pope Leo IV. Imagine that, right? Imagine that your confirmation sponsor, your godson of a pope. That's a wonderful way to start your life, right? I would love that.
Great things.
He was
destined for great things from the very.
He was destined for. Asser tells us in his biography that at that time, imagine a 5-year-old kid, that Pope actually anointed him as king. Whether or not that is true or that's post hoc, that's up to the reader and to history to judge. But he was also, Asser tells us, he was anointed as king, which is quite interesting. Absolutely. There's a lot of different parallels, and so he made it back to England. But unfortunately, when he got back from England, his mother passed, and this actually have a great effect, because after this point, it seems that his education was neglected by the court. When he was 12, he didn't know how to read or anything like that. And then this is something really interesting. He actually learned to read Latin in his late 30s. So if you haven't learned Latin yet, there's hope for you. So,
get started.
But yeah, we should. But he was a great lover of poetry. There's this wonderful story where his mom showed him a book of poetry, and he said, "Whoever can memorize this book, I will give this book to you." And he took the book and wrote it. He ran away with to the courts and asked people to read for him. And he memorized all those poems. And this is really important that Asser recorded this to history. His love for the arts, which becomes really, really important after he was able to achieve peace in Anglo-Saxon England. Anyways, so he grew up around royal courts, but by the time he was 23, the Vikings incursions were really creating havoc across England, and three of his brothers already passed through natural causes, or it's not well recorded in history. And it was at that time, it was him and his older brother by 2 years, I think, Ethelred. He became king of Wessex when a great army of Vikings was assembled. And by this point, I should mention that the whole Anglo-Saxon kingdoms have fallen except for Wessex. So there was a Viking invasion that took one of the biggest in terms of territory kingdoms, the kingdom of Northumbria, fall to the Vikings invasion. And then after Northumbria, another kingdom called the kingdom of East Anglia fall down. And you know what? I can't help it. Let me see. I want to read you something because it tells you about the character of all these kings, right? So the king, when the kingdom of Northumbria fell, then it was really easy to take over the kingdom of East Anglia, which is a smaller kingdom. And the king was captured, right, and was attached to a wall, and they fired arrows to him, right, but he kept proclaiming the name of Christ. So you can make a considered argument that he was martyred, right? Yeah, out of hate for the faith, and it is recorded in history. The life of Saint Edmund, and it says, I wanna see. I want to read the last part. It says, "I never was the sort to take flight. I would rather, if necessary, die from my own nation. God Almighty knows that I will never falter from His service, nor from loving His truth. If I die, I live." This his last words. These are the kind of men that we're talking about. These are the Anglo-Saxon men. This I like to say, this is a time where men were men and women were women, right?
And he was not saying something like he was saying that when it's very inconvenient to say that. If you're captured by the Vikings, you know your death is not going to be short, and it's not going to be pleasant. It's going to be the worst thing possible that people could imagine doing. That would be what they would do to you, as long as you're alive.
King Alfred, the king of Northumbria, who died just the same year or just few months before him, he was killed in a ritualistic, horrible way called the blood eagle. And basically what the Vikings will do, they will push him down to the ground, and they take an axe and then carve on his back and carve out the lungs and put the lungs out as the person was alive. These are the level of barbarism on the Vikings. It's just outstanding. Absolutely terrible.
So every good story needs a good antagonist, right?
Oh yeah,
right.
Yeah, for sure. We have plenty of those.
A great story.
The picture that you paint, though, is incredible, because it's people think of history as very boring, it's like very dry. It's like a collection of dates and names and things. But if you think about this in reality, like, what was this like? This is an incredibly dark time. Civilization has fallen since the Romans left, and we're ruled by barbarians. And then you have these people are civilized by Christianity, and they embrace the faith. And only for the barbaric and bloodthirsty Vikings to come sweeping across the land. So like all of this it's just fascinating. And I think we are so impoverished to not have a good understanding of what was going on at that time. Because like what you're saying with the blood eagle, like that is incredibly brutal. And like the kind of courage that these kings must have had in order to continue to fight for their own people. Because it doesn't, you hear something like that and you see what they're facing, like facing a punishment, like becoming a pincushion for the Vikings, with their arrows, or facing something like the blood eagle. Like you know for a fact that those kings were not fighting for their own power and their own benefit, because it's not worth it. If you're just wanting to hold on to riches, you're not going to fight you're not going to face that kind of odds for just maintaining your riches. They had a genuine concern for their people, and like that quote tells me that they have a genuine concern for serving God, so it's what a setting, to start off the story. It's incredible.
No, yeah, it's absolutely incredible. And while you're saying about that, we all dreamed that we could have the same fortitude and courage to do something like that, if God forbid the time comes. But we don't know until it actually happens, right? It came to mind that this act of barbarism it's not only sequester this time period. And you think about a few years back, about 5 years or so back, the Coptic Christians who were beheaded on the beaches, right, by ISIS, right? This is happening today. You know, we still need to pray for our church in Nigeria, where many priests, nuns are being kidnapped every day. So, and the same display of courage that still happens today. It's just, you know, the power of the Holy Spirit infused in people who are given the courage to withstand something like that. But going back to the story, yes, absolutely, Peter, you're absolutely right. This is just as a side note, you know, reading about Alfred, it's so incredible that from the standpoint of storytelling, I mean, this is a story that begs to be told. I mean, it's the truth, and it's better than any movie I have ever seen. You know, in terms of the twists and turns and things, in terms of what is at stake and what people have to overcome. It's a wonderful Aristotelian comedy. But anyway, so let me go on with the story. So at the time that Ethelred, King Alfred's brother, became king, Wessex was surrounded in all sides. Mercia was a very, very weak kingdom, and I think by this time it was already fallen or had a puppet king. Actually, their king, the Anglo-Saxon king, when saw that what was happening around, all of a sudden decided to take an extended vacation. Extended pilgrimage to Rome, and never came back. so you have on both sides, right? I don't blame him at all. But that time, Wessex was the last standing Anglo-Saxon kingdom that was the last kingdom standing. You know, Wessex fall, and the whole history of England changes completely for at least 200, 300 years.
Well, let me expand it. It's probably not just England. It's probably the whole history of Christendom itself, which was Europe, was the precursor to Europe. There's probably no Christendom if there is no England, because then there's no France. They're so tightly closed together, and France is the elder daughter of the church. It changes it changes the West in its entirety.
Yeah, exactly. And from a strategic point of view, imagine if the Vikings had, or the Danish, we call it, most of them were from Denmark, the Danes. Imagine they have the whole island as a strategic port to launch attacks to the continent. You know, they can retreat to Britain. They can, and then go to it. It would have changed. Yeah, it would have been
pulled out, and then you find another soft spot, and you just keep on. That's their MO. So that would have been exactly what would have happened. Exactly right. So onwards with story. So King Alfred, this Viking hordes came in to Wessex and started invading Wessex, and there was this battle that happened in Reading, right? And this is sort of the first battle that actually Alfred and his brother King Alfred, really young people, actually saw actual battle. You know, all the times they've been part of sieges before. They went to Mercia to try to aid Mercia, but they never saw battle, and they were they received a baptism by fire, in which they suffered a great defeat in Reading, trying to stop the advances of the Viking army, and they retreated, and they have to regroup. 4 days later, they met the advancing Viking army in a town now we call Ashton, right? And it's not because there was an ash tree in the middle of the battlefield. This is 4 days after they got a really, really severe defeat. And this is my favorite story of King Alfred in battle. The Viking army was commanded by 2 Vikings king and a bunch of ealdormen, right? And they were able to reach Ashton, and Ashton sits on a hill, so very
the great strategic advantage for the Vikings. They knew how to pick their spot for battle, right? They have the high ground, they have the army, and then here comes, the night before, the Wex's army come in. And the Vikings, what they did, they divided their army into two. They split the army into two. One half of the army was commanded by the two Viking kings, and the other half was put in charge by the aldermen of the Vikings. Right. Seeing this, Alfred and Ethelred divided their own forces into two. One was to be commanded by Alfred, and the other one was commanded by Ethelred. So they make this plan. They decided. So Alfred goes to his camp, and Ethelred goes to his camp as well. And Alfred, marched his troop towards the battlefield, right? And the Viking army start advancing. Half of the Viking army start advancing, and Alfred is waiting for his brother to show up to battle. It's the whole half of the Anglo-Saxon, the Wex's army was not in the battlefield, right? There was a point where Astor tells us that he needed to make a decision. He needed either to withdraw his troops or advance his troop, right? He decided that it was too late to withdraw his troop. It would be disastrous. So he went out and faced the Viking army by himself with his troops, right? And this time, and this is something that's fascinating, and I love the audience can get this. This is a time where the leaders of the army, the noblemen, the noble class, was expected to be at the front line of a battle. Okay, this nonsense of having the king in his camp watching the battle at a safe distance, surrounded by his bodyguards. No. That's nonsense for an Anglo-Saxon. The king had to be at the battle line. The prince had to be at the front of the battlefield, right? And with this in mind, you can use your imagination. You can see how Alfred, 23 years old kid, right? He's not the king. His heir apparent to the king. He hasn't won any battle, right? And he's leading a group of seasoned veterans, Saxon grown men into battle. Put yourself in those shoes. You're only 23 years old. No, his only experience in battle was an astounded defeat. He doesn't have the authority of being king, right? And he's leading this man into battle. Right in front of them. He was part of that shield wall. So one of the tactics at that time was to put their shields, right, overlap the shields with each other. I think people have seen this in movies, right, and march forward, right. The uses of arrows wasn't common at this time. This is something that, hey, if we ever filmed this, I don't want to see, volley of arrows going back and forth. It was mostly lances that they threw at each other for a distance, but then it was the clashing of the two shield walls, and then short lance that they tried to find any piece of flesh that they could. And the tactic was that you confronted the other shield wall, right? And with your lance, you start poking and trying to find you can hit someone in the flesh, right? And if you were hit, if you were wounded, the idea was that immediately someone from behind, from the second row, takes your place, because the success of the battle literally depended on those men standing together. The moment that you break the integrity of your shield wall, the battle is lost. It allows, even for a small gap in time, it allows for Vikings or for your enemy to break that, go behind the line, and start slaughtering everyone. So it was really important to have a level of trust of the men that was either side of you to hold that line. Okay, so Alfred leads towards the Viking. The two shield walls start branching, and to the surprise of the Vikings, they didn't back down. The Alfred's men withstood the attack, and not only that, they start actually gaining ground on the Vikings, right? On the Vikings. But it was a stalemate. But still, he was able to push them back, and there's back and forth, and yet he was withstanding. Seeing this, this small army, the Vikings made the decision to send the full force of the army. The one that was behind start coming in, right? And says, they are withstanding, but by sheer numbers, we will defeat them. Still, Alfred, half of the troop of the Saxons was able to withstand that as well, right? But there was a point in the battle where you can imagine that you're trying to stop, you're right there, and all of a sudden you see the Vikings' face of courage and savagery turn into fear. And their Viking shield walls start collapsing, and they start running away. So what happened was that out in the distance comes Ethelred, a little bit late to battle, coming into battle. When the Vikings saw that, reinforcement, the second half of the Saxons was coming in, and understanding that they could not deal with this smaller half, they understood that they were not in a position to withhold, and they run away, and the Christians, were able to hold the battle, hold the ground. So what happened to Ethelred? So after he met with Alfred, he went to his camp, and he was determined to attend to Mass and say his prayer. So he was slated for battle because he went to Mass, literally. So the divine providence, it's just fascinating. His brother was late for battle. At least he had a good excuse. Hey, I was a mess, and the priest went literally long in his homily. It was.
I would make that excuse if I was Alfred. I would have been a little bit upset.
Yeah. But they won, right? It was a much needed win that they had. But thereafter, Alfred had a series of engagement, basins, which they lost that battle. Another major engagement again, and then there was the Battle of Merton. And on the Battle of Merton, something very interesting happened, and I hope I can be short. They faced the Viking shield wall, and the Saxons were just furious. They were furious. They actually were able to collapse the Viking shield wall, right? They break it. So once the shield was broken, that signaled that you basically won the battle, right? But the Saxons didn't press their advantage, right? They start celebrating a little bit too soon. And that allows the retreating Vikings to reorganize and form another shield wall and come in and re-engage the Saxon. When this happened, the Saxon lost the momentum and they lost that battle. Many Saxons were cut down, but unfortunately in this battle, Ethelred was wounded. He survived the battle, but his wound, we're talking about a time where the understanding of medicine wasn't too advanced, and eventually he, as Asser says, went the way of the flesh. He passed away, making Alfred the king of Wessex. Thereafter, there was another battle, the first battle that Alfred led as king, the Battle of Wilton, and that one also was lost in a very similar fashion that happens in Merton. Since the Saxons didn't learn the lesson, they broke the shield wall of the Vikings, started celebrating too soon. The Vikings regrouped and went on the attack. But at this point, the Vikings were used to having easy wins, right? They just, we're going to go there, we're going to plunder, we're going to do all that we want, and minimal cost of life, minimal effort, and we are rich. But at this point, the Saxons, the Wessex kingdom was actually putting on a strong fight against them. And what they decided to do, what Alfred decided to do, was to pay a ransom. We're going to pay you this money, and you guys can sort of go away. And looking at, cost-benefit analysis of the Vikings. They were very good at doing this. They knew if they keep pressing, they could win, but the cost was too high. So Alfred paid what is called the Dengeld, which is sort of money for them to go, and then they left the Wessex for the time being. They exchanged some. Usually, they would exchange some hostages and do all these things to complain. More often than not, the Vikings would not honor their agreement, even though they will exchange hostages. As soon as nightfall happens, more often than not, the Vikings will slit the throat of all their hostages, and then neglect, don't honor their agreement, and that is recorded multiple times. So now we have Alfred, a young kid of 23, being the king of Wessex in a relatively very short-lived peace period of about 7 years. And you would think that this time is the time to regroup and rethink your strategy and doing all those different things. But not much really happened in his kingdom. He didn't really direct much. He tried to establish a network of communication to observe Viking movement and all these things until 7 years later. The Vikings return, knocking at the door, and this time it's a great army, bigger than the previous that they have seen that came out of Northumbria. It's a Viking king by the name of Guthrum, if most likely I'm butchering his name. But
sorry, he's dead. He doesn't mind.
Yeah. Well, he's a wonderful story. I mean, you guys, this is a fascinating story. So he came in, and the Vikings were very good at utilizing the Roman calendar to their advantage, right? They did this with Northumbria. In Northumbria, years before, they attacked on All Hallows Day, right, where there was a great festivity and all the defenses were down because people were celebrating. And Guthrum did something very similar on the Feast of the Epiphany, the 12 days of Christmas. He attacked Althany, where a royal state where Alfred was staying. And Alfred barely got out with his life with his young daughter and young kids and son, barely alive. And he overtook his kingdom in a surprise attack that happened. Basically, he just showed up and started slaughtering people. And not a great battle happens, but he took over for the time being his kingdom, and this led to Alfred escaping to the marshes. And there's wonderful stories about this wonderful. This is when Alfred became a legend in the minds of the Saxon. There's a lot of different stories. One where instead of going to shire that have better fortifications or better chance to withstand the attack, or instead of going to Rome and abandoning his people, he made the point to stay as close as possible to the Viking army and start harassing the army, sort of asymmetrical warfare. Finally, they're starting to adapt to the situation. And he throughout that bitter winter, he harassed the Vikings over and over and over to send a message to Guthrum that he was still fighting for his country, and send a message to his people that his king has abandoned them. However, a lot of his aldermen of this northern town of Wessex abandoned Alfred, and they pledged allegiance to the Viking king, right? This is they betray, the ring giver, which is the king, right?
And rings.
Right, and the great story of Beowulf come in, where Ganagundel, is exiled outside the mead hall, right? and gets furious when he listens, the scoffs, the poets and singing songs and reciting poems, right? This alderman did exactly that. They abandoned their ring giver, their king, in order to control with the Viking. So Alfred also harassed them. They let them know that they did something terrible wrong. Some of the aldermen stayed, but anyways, long story short, this is when Alfred becomes a legend. There's this wonderful legend in which he shows up at this small hut. He's by himself, right? And he's welcomed by the maiden lady. Her husband is out with as a shepherd, and she's making cakes, right? And she asked him to look over the cakes were being baked in the oven, right? And Alfred, all worried about how to get back at the Vikings, he let the cakes burn. The lady, the maiden came in, and seeing that the cakes were burning, right, actually engaged into a diatribe against this man who she didn't know he was the king, and say, "How dare you? You're so much willing to eat these cakes, but you're not willing to take a look at them and look after them." At this, the story goes that Alfred apologized and started taking care of the bread. I think it's an enduring story, but it tells a lot about, whether it's true or not, it tells a lot about his character, his humility. He's the bloody king, if I can say that. I'm sorry, right? And he's allowed to be reprimanded by this commoner, right? Like that would be a great point to say, "Hey, don't you know who I am?"
Right, exactly. But one of the virtues that Peterson espouses in his conservative manifesto is humility. And so again, that harkens back to what we're doing here, is we're showing these virtues that founded the West.
Right. This story is recorded actually in the life of Saint Neot, about two centuries later. So we don't know if it's actually true, but the fact that is certainly a story that was told at his time. Asser didn't record it, but I am very trustworthy of oral tradition. I think a lot of historians today, they poo-poo the idea of oral tradition. I think there's a lot of validity in those stories, and something similar may have actually happened. This idea of humility, and Alfred actually was very conscientious about that. Okay, onwards. So that was my my short story that I made it really long. There's throughout spring. So let me just put a bow on this because this is important. Going back to Guthrum, in Pentecost, Alfred was able to assemble a network with all his shire, and he was able to call on an army. And he actually summoned his army on Pentecost Sunday. Very significant. And set up to meet in battle. Went straight to meet Guthrum at the Battle of Edington, and Guthrum almost caught him by surprise. Long story short, the Christians hold the battlefield. He was able to win that battle and capture the city. He captured Guthrum's family. He went on the run. Thereafter, he kept the family, and then thereafter he was captured, and actually he was finally defeated. And after the defeat of Guthrum, Alfred showed an incredible foresight, an incredible capacity for mercy. So he offered Guthrum and his noblemen to convert, to be baptized. And a few weeks later, Guthrum was baptized, and King Alfred was his godfather. In Anglo-Saxon England, kids were baptized immediately after birth. So what has been something really fascinating for Anglo-Saxons, seeing full-grown men being baptized, right? Actually, there was a law that says that you incurring a penalty if you didn't baptize your kid, your baby, after a certain amount of time. But he baptized, and then Guthrum took the Christian name Æthelstan. He became Æthelstan. And then part of the treaty was that Guthrum was going to leave Wessex, and he was going to take over, keep the kingdom of East Anglia. So Guthrum went to East Anglia and took that kingdom. But interestingly, and there's a great treaty between them that actually lasted the test of time. Æthelstan didn't betray Alfred. He kept his part of the deal by not rising against Æthelstan. And these are just wonderful stories.
Right, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he even honored his allegiance to such a degree that didn't he fight with Alfred by Alfred's side at some point later on?
That may have happened. That may have happened. That would be lovely. I'm not familiar with that.
I believe, but I could be wrong. I believe I've read that somewhere. I know. So I want to you've just set the stage for really the greatness of Alfred. Now that he's established peace, he has gone on to set what England is to become,
Yes.
And we really don't have time to describe all of this, but can you walk us back to a little bit of what is his greatest achievement now at this point?
All right. Okay. So I would say three things. Three things are extremely important. So fourth, if you include, standing up against the Vikings, right? So the first thing he did is restructured Wessex defenses. Right. One of the problems that they had is that the Saxon army was a part-time army. It was composed of people who were farmers, and at times of national emergency, they were called to battle. But that meant that they could not be on the battlefield for too long. So whenever they caught the Vikings in a city and there was a siege, that siege could not last very long because the men needed to go back to the Shire to farm. So that was a problem. Also, it took very long to raise that army, allowing the Vikings to get the positions and do whatever they wanted. So from a strategic military point of view, that was a big issue. So what Alfred did in a very innovative way, what he did is he says that half of the eligible men were to serve in the army so he created a standing army. And that standing army was composed of half of the eligible men, while the other half of eligible men stay behind the Shire. So now you have a continuity of farming, right? People that take care of the home, while half of the men are defending home, right? So this is very important. Now, moreover, what he did, and this is important because this is so important. So foundations are really important. The other half, he divided the army. So now he has this full army. He divided in two. He divided into an standing army that can be called up at any moment notice, right? So every man was supposed to bring provisions for 60 days, right? And at any moment notice, they were ready to be on the fight. So cutting out the time. But the other half of the men were distributed against in a network of fortresses or fortified cities that he built around Wessex. And a lot of these cities were Roman towns, right, that already have pre-fortifications. So he had to make better those fortifications. And there were some of the towns that were new towns, were Saxon towns that he built fortifications. So now what you can imagine is that now you have men guarding the city, an army guarding the city, another army that is ready to respond to any threat, right? This allows for a couple things to happen. So it allows for people to be at ease, right? That they can farm and their city is going to be protected, number one. Number two, it established law and order around his kingdom, because all these major centers of trade have a standing army that can provide a sense of stability and safety, which in turn turns into improve the commerce and trading. All these big cities become trading posts because they were safe, right? So that's something that was very important. And actually, later on, it turns out that this system was actually brilliant, and it fended off a number of Viking invasion that came after later part of his reign, right? And he also, as a side note, I love the sea. I can make the argument that many historians can, there is in dispute, that he's the father of the English Navy. He commissioned a navy in order to fend off Vikings. So for all those things, that's one. Now, the second one, I would say the second reason why he's great is briefly want to touch, because this is pertains to this. He reformed the economic system of Wessex. And I think this is a topic of its own, right? At the time that he became king, the silver penny was about 20% silver. It was just absolutely, the coin was very devalued, right? And there were only 2 mints in the whole kingdom, one in London, one in Canterbury. By the time by the time he passed, that number of 2 was quadruple. And he ordered the penny to be as pure as possible. So he valued the currency. So for every 4 old pennies, they made 1 penny, which now, having the value of the penny be totally pure silver, that was a boost for the economy, because he brought in a lot of trades from continental Europe. So it make his nation very prosperous, right? We should go to the gold standard.
Yeah. Well, there you go. But that's the thing, is if you make your currency valuable to other people, to other countries,
exactly right,
then you're giving a huge gift to your people. You're allowing them to actually trade in a much better, in a much more optimum way. So yeah, that's exactly. I mean, we need to take note from that. Please, can we elect a King Alfred?
Oh man, we'd love to. But okay, so I just went through 3 things that would make any man great. But I think the last 2 that I want to touch on are really absolutely exceptional. And he was a man of heart, right? And I will get a little bit ahead of myself, but he in the preface, so he translated a number of great books. We'll get to that in a second. But in the preface of his translation to the Gregory's Pastoral Care, we will touch on it a little bit later. But I want to highlight this because it's important to mention. This is a great man of faith. He writes, we were Christians in name alone. Right? Who that reminds you? Our culture, right? And very few of us possess Christian virtues. Wow. Well, when he became king, and cannot understate this more, the church, the Anglo-Saxon church, was debased. A lot of the monasteries, people were not joining the monastery. They have to bring people from continental Europe or from Wales to become monks and keep that tradition. What was once the center of culture, like the monastery in Lindisfarne, was in complete deterioration. There was a moral vacuum in the Anglo-Saxon at the time that he became king. There were still men, there were still great men and all those things, but in his eyes, there wasn't proper worship. There was basically, he could count with one hand, really hyperbole, the number of people who could actually read Latin. And a lot of these great libraries, a Saxon library full of patristic texts, were just adorning the walls because no one could read them, right? And so the level of education was basically non-existent at this time. So, and that really concerned him, because in his program, in Alfred's mind, he viewed these 2 things to go hand in hand, right? If you want your countrymen to espouse Christian virtues, right, to return to Christ, right, it was essential to restore Christian learning, which was completely absent. So here comes Alfred, and it starts this great endeavor of re-educating, re-evangelizing his countrymen, right? And this is, I think this is just, if he would have done only this, I think this is enough reason to call him the great, right? To call him great. So he did a number of things. So first he recruited men to his court, learned men. And then here we have Asser, his biographer, who was a Welsh monk. He brought John, a priest from Old Saxony, all in Germany. He brought many men from continental Europe who later on become archbishops or bishops in his court, right? With the idea that these are learned men, that they know both what we call now Old English and Latin, right? To enrich the court and to actually enrich that intellectual life of the mind in his court. And then he went on a program to gather as many books as possible and translate those books into the vernacular of his people, Old English, which is very important. He thought if you enrich the mind, you enrich the soul, and thereby you can sow, proper living, among his noblemen. Then he went further, right? So now that his court is on the right track, right? It was required for holding office in his government to know how to read, right? Because who can interpret his decrees on that? He needed to have his noblemen to be well read, and he wanted them to be able to have access to all this great wisdom from all these great books of antiquity, and as a way to inform proper governance, right? And he was this guy's so incredible. He was so just and fair. He understood that a lot of his noblemen were old people. The old saying goes, you cannot teach an old dog new tricks, right? But if you didn't have the attitude, but you were trying, that was good enough for him, right? He says, he gave these, if you cannot learn, right, have your son, your heirs to learn, and then you can still keep your office, right? And if you can't do that, then hire someone who can read so he can read to you. If you don't do any of those things, then you're out, right? So he was very fair. So by having his everyone in his government, office holders who could read, that was a great win. I didn't stop there. He established schools, parishes school around his kingdom. He literally established schools for kids, for born free Anglo-Saxon kids to learn how to read. And here he worked very closely with the bishops to identify young, talented youth who could first be taught how to write and read in Old English, and then teach them how to write and read in Latin. Again, this whole project, restoring proper liturgy, restoring proper worship in his kingdom. He also contributed, he founded a number of different monasteries, these great centers of learning. And again, he still had the issue that, recruitment amongst the Anglo-Saxon men was kind of lacking. So he brought people from Gaelic people, from people from Welsh, people from the old continent into this great center of learning. And he also founded a royal school in Winchester, his capital, where he would teach the youth of the noble class, right? So he went to this wonderful program. I mentioned earlier, right, that his own education was neglected. He was 12 and he didn't know how to read or write, and this kept going for a very long time. A lot of these people that he brought in was for them to read him the books because he could not read. Arce says that in one of the feast day, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting which day, when he was, approaching 40, that he actually make a major breakthrough, and he actually began to read and write in Latin. And amongst the book that he translated a number of different books, and this is really important because it tells you about where the importance was. He translated the pastoral letter from Gregory. This was a letter to the clergy of Pope Gregory, a letter to the clergy, how to be good, how to sustain good governance of the church, right? So he wanted all his bishops to read this. It's a wonderful document, right? And not only his bishop to read it, but also the office holders of his kingdom, how to be fair, how to have proper governance. Then he also translated the Soliloquies of St. Augustine of Hippo, the great bishop of Hippo, one of my favorite saints. He translated that and he distributed that amongst all the bishopric, right? And also he translated the first 50 Psalms, right? And I think he passed before he was able to go on. But a great lover of arts, a great lover of wisdom, philosopher, if you will. Let me see. So yes, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, in bringing that all together, I have to say that despite the fact I have a great love of democracy, you can only conclude that this Alfred instilled a good government. And that's an important point for us to remember, is that the seeds of a good democracy or of a good government anywhere take care of the basics first. You see, we see right now with, I think, a lot of the well-intentioned people on the left, I'm not saying everyone's well-intentioned, but some of them are, there's a desire to want to put the cart before the horse a little bit. Alfred made his people safe, and that's the big role of government. That is the number one role, is you keep your people safe, and that's what he did first. And then he reformed the economy, which meant people would have the basic necessities that they needed. And then he went about doing all the extras. He built block upon block, which is what we need to remember now when we think about government as people of a republic. What are the basics that we're supposed to be building upon together? I think that's something that we can really take from Alfred. But I wanted to ask, as you're going on so much about, and I know we have to leave here pretty soon, so much you're a research scientist, you're finding a cure for cancer, and you're also a filmmaker on the side, well, maybe not on the side, maybe full time, who knows how you would classify it. But how is it that you, with all these pursuits, have become so enraptured with Alfred? What is it that is so important to you?
Oh goodness, I think it's a divine spark of imagination. So let me see if I can put the two together, right? As a scientist, right? You're out searching for truth. That's your goal, right? That's the goal of any good scientist. Truth is what matters, despite all you hear on the media. Good scientist searches for truth, right? Part of that process of understanding nature, right? Understanding how thing works. There's a point where it is very important to be creative and utilize your imagination. There's a problem, right? And there are a number of possible alternatives, right, that can address that problem or tells you something about it. There's that divine moment where all you have is your imagination. You start thinking about how could it work, right? How could it, how this mechanism can lead to this effect. And here's where hypothesis-driven research happens, right? Comes from the imagination. You have to be creative, you have to be imaginative to come up with this idea, and then ways to test them, right? The scientific method, which, by the way, that's another topic for a podcast, which I absolutely love, came from the Catholic Church, right? You have...
we know we're Catholics. We don't like science, Caleb.
Yes. Oh, goodness gracious. So don't get me started. Father George Lemaitre, he was the architect of the Big Bang Theory. He was the first person who proposed the Big Bang Theory. And when he proposed it, Albert Einstein, which they were friends, and Father George Lemaitre was a Jesuit and he was a physicist. When he proposed the theory that everything started at a single, that our universe started at a single point, Alfred, keep saying Alfred, hey, Dr. Freud, just look. Einstein telling him, your mathematics are impeccable, your physics sucks. He didn't say it that way, but but because it sounded too much as a history, it sounded too much like creation, right? George Mendel, the founder of genetics, right? Nicholas Sternberg, a bishop, the founder of geology. And the list goes on and on and on. Yeah.
Well, getting back to Alfred, though, I want to posit another idea for you, Caleb. Though I think, and maybe I'm writing myself in too much here, but I think that let me ask you: is it possible that you're so interested in Alfred because you see in him a story worth telling on the big screen?
No, definitely. Well, to go to the point. The thing about imagination. What I was going with that is that his story just sparked my imagination in terms of what a life well lived, a life of virtue can accomplish, right? And I think obviously he was in a position. He was put in a position of power, right? And he did the best. He did the best he could do with the position he was given. But we're all put in different positions, right? And it challenged for me. Alfred challenged me to see. I did this. What can you do? We all have the graces, right? We all have graces. We all have talent, right? What say you? What you can do with your talents and the place that God have placed you. So because that power of imagination of his life inspired my life. But yes, you're absolutely true. What you're saying is absolutely true. I read his story and I can see this into a film. I can see this is a story that should be told. And it should inspire people. Filmmaking, this, we all know, Peter, this, has this unique ability to, bypass, the gatekeeper of our mind, reason, right? and inspire the heart, right? And then reason becomes more malleable to it. So you go out and you tell a story of a life of heroic virtue, right? I think that can inspire many people.
Absolutely. What I see? I have this image as you were telling Alfred, especially when he's in the swamps. I think of the story of Aragorn when he's a strider.
It's a strider. Yes.
In the movie, when we first meet Aragorn, he's got the pipe and he's in shadows and he's at the prancing pony and he looks, as Tolkien writes, he says he looks foul. Even though he feels there's a fair aura to him. And I see that as the opening where we first meet Alfred is, he's in the swamps, and it's the great battles and you can flash back to what's happened before, but you see that as this man that's shrouded in sadness and darkness, and he's the fallen king, the king without a kingdom. And it's about how he returns and claims his kingship.
Wow. I wonder if Aragorn is actually, I know that Tolkien didn't write allegory, but it was inspired by the story of Alfred.
I wonder.
This is, wow. I didn't make that connection until you mentioned this. That's brilliant. Yeah, he's a king without a kingdom, and that was Alfred. And that's basically Aragorn. When we find him, since a fall, right? That's extraordinary.
It makes me wish a little bit. Well, maybe I can be grateful. I wish that this Amazon series would have had something like that would have been in the ballpark. Instead of trying to tell like Silmarillion without having the rights to the Silmarillion, let's tell the story of Strider. That would be. But we could do that now with Alfred. We tell that Strider story. And it becomes that great series, that fantasy series that we all envision when we read these great tales.
Yeah. Now let me ask you: if you tell this, you look at this story, with the advent of streaming services and all these things, and let's say you have Bezos money and you have $1 billion, right? Do you see? What would be the best way to tell the story in a cinematic form of a film? Or a series that allows you to to go
Hands
into
down.
greater detail.
Hands down, I would say it in a series. You don't need $1 billion to tell a good hour-long yarn. You don't need.
That was a stack at. Don't get me started with Rings of Power. Just leave that over there.
And that's the great thing about a series is you let it. You make one, and then you let the audience decide if you should make more. You don't have to put all your chips on the table right away, and you don't. A fantasy, you don't need all that money. Like you were saying, you said that this is way more money than we have. Most people don't have the money for $1 billion. Yeah, but I think with modern filmmaking methods, I was just looking at an AI that you could use it completely free. And you type in a background, and then another friend of mine took that AI generated background. You just type it in, the AI makes it, and then he comped it onto footage. So he's basically making, $1 million shots for nothing. There's the stuff that's available to us now is it really levels the playing field. However, I think we should probably put a pin on it for right now because my little boy needs to get put to bed. Yeah. So I beg my apologies to you all and to our reader, our listener as well. Caleb, thank you so much for giving us this great look back into the past of this wonderful story of Alfred.
Yeah, no, thank you for having it. May I say, I know that I'm being terrible here now, but may I say something that is very important. Alfred did all this, all his life, while he was in anguish and pain. He suffered what we know today as Crohn's disease, which is pure anguish. So he carried his cross well. His suffering. It was not all battles and all these different things. From age 23 onwards, still he passed, and most likely he passed out of complication of Crohn's disease. He was in anguish and agony, and still he was able to live that social life, which is absolutely extraordinary.
What a hero!
Wow.
Yeah, that's great. And there are other aspects of his life, but what a pleasure. Thank you so much. I just realized that I did a lot of the talking. I should have, I'm so sorry.
No, you have a story to tell. That's fascinating. Incredible.
It's wonderful. Why don't we all make this story together someday? What do you guys think?
I love that. Yeah, let's not just say it. Let's do it.
I never just say something. Peter knows.
Yep.
Yeah. So let's have a draft by Friday.
You don't say which Friday it is. It could be, a Friday 10 years from now. So yes, we'll do that.
No. Yeah. By this Friday.
All right, everyone. Peter, thank you. Caleb, thank you.
Thank you for everyone for listening. It was a pleasure.
All right, everyone. We're the Pinedo Brothers, Catholic filmmaking brothers, working to revitalize the world of Catholic art through film. We'll catch you all next time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Pinedo Brothers Podcast, an artist podcast for Catholics. We hope you enjoyed it, and if so, please consider subscribing, and commenting below. That really helps. This episode was edited and recorded by me, JP. Makeup was done by no one, if you couldn't tell. For more information on us, check us out at pinedobrothers.com. Thanks again.